everybody, welcome, man. I am psyched to be here at the Port Hudson State Historic Site. There is a lot to see here, and it is Port Hudson 160. Now, what day is Port Hudson 160? Because you've got, an attempt to run the batteries here. You've got one attack, two attacks. You've got the longest siege, real siege, in all of American history, and a whole lot more to see. So, in order to talk about some of the things that you can see here, let's bring on Daniel Goyer. He runs the Port Hudson State Historic Site. Daniel, what would people expect to see here?
Well, we have a museum that's filled with tons of artifacts, stuff that was actually found here on the battlefield. Great artifacts, great exhibits, great interpretive panels and signs. We have artillery displays throughout the site. We have over 6 miles of walking trails that actually lead out to many of the places on the battlefield that saw significant action on May 27th and June 14th throughout the duration of the siege from May 23rd, 63 to July 9th.
Good. So, when people come here, do they just go around this area, or is this a driving park, a walking park? What do we got?
It's predominantly a walking park. So you drive here to the museum, and this is where the trails start. After you look through the museum, which we have a short video, which you can kind of get a great background of the history of the site and what happened here and why this is important. You can look at all the exhibits, take a trail map, and then hit the trails. And there's two ways to access the trail system from here. And so one leads out to Fort Desperate and one goes out to some of the other locations.
Super cool, and I can attest to how interesting and well done are these exhibits inside here. They've got low tech, they got some high tech coming maybe as well, and it really prepares you to go out to the field. Now, if I may, Daniel, here we are. I mean, we're not at Baton Rouge, we're not at New Orleans, we're not at Vicksburg. Why in the world, is there an interest in a siege here?
Well, it's the longest siege in American military history. At least in the Civil War, 48 days, one day longer than Vicksburg.
Okay, so what you have here is Vicksburg up here and Port Hudson down here. You've got the Red River kind of coming in between the two, and you've also got the railroad going into Vicksburg. So I guess you needed some sort of a span of the river in order to make any use of it.
Yeah, so this is kind of the other end of the bookend, I like to call Vicksburg, and you have Port Hudson down here.
I've heard say Vicksburg is the key and Port Hudson is the lock.
The lock, yeah. Right. And so it's important that to the Confederacy that both of these locations hold.
Yeah, so famously, you've heard Lincoln say that Lincoln said Vicksburg is the key and this war can't be brought to a close till that key is in our pocket. Well, Vicksburg in itself can't do it. You really need that span in order to be able to get at it. So throughout 1862-63, you've got Union forces trying to get at Vicksburg, and then all of a sudden you've got Nathaniel Banks marching up toward the Red River, and actually to the Red River, and all of a sudden turns toward Port Hudson, and that's going to result in the first attack here.
Right, he's got troops coming up from Baton Rouge, and he's over, like you said, at the Red River, and he comes down through St. Francisville, just north of here, and kind of pulls off a double envelopment of Port Hudson. And by May 23rd, he's completely invested Port Hudson, completely surrounded it. It's a true siege here. And he makes two major attempts to assault the works here, and both attempts are defeated. Kind of settles in for a siege, and then by July 7th, word reaches here that Vicksburg has surrendered, and that kind of signals the end for Port Hudson, because you got to have both. So,
yeah, well, what good is the lock
what
without
good
the
is
key?
Right. So, one little spot on the river isn't that important.
Yeah, to be clear, that means the railroad can no longer get across, and you can no longer use the Red River with just Port Hudson holding out here. So We've got a lot to see. We're going to show you. We already have shown you some video from inside there. We're going to hit the field, show you where some of this May action, where this June action happened. But remember that in between the two, before and after them, there are siege operations going on here. We got photos taken here. We got cool trails, we got roads. Thanks so much for having us. We'll see you out in the field. We have walked now from the visitor center out on one of the many trails here at Port Hudson, out to Fort Babcock, and you can see that these are substantial works. I don't think anything's going to hit me shooting at ground level from there, especially if I'm pushed up against a position, especially if it's revetted with logs, especially if I'm really able to get under the cover. Now, on May 22nd, you're going to have Union soldiers advancing this way. They're going to take this position. They're going to go beyond it, attack the Confederates in sort of a high water mark. We'll get to that in a moment. We have to back up a little bit here. We haven't even talked about who these soldiers are. We've kind of talked about, some of the troops coming here. But to set this up, let's hand this over to Daniel again, and he can tell us who are the Confederates, who are the Union soldiers, and take it from there.
Right, yeah, so here at Fort Babcock, you have infantry under the 75th New York Infantry. These are different regiments under Brigadier General Godfrey Weitzel, and they're attacking several different regiments of Arkansas and Alabama troops located just a couple hundred yards from this location. Now they get to this point, they attack from across the ridge, which is to the north of here. They come down, they cross Foster Creek, what's known as today Foster Creek. It was Little Sandy back then. They cross the creek, scramble up this side of the ridge, and they make their attack. They are unsuccessful, and they fall back and dig in and create what we call today Fort Babcock.
All right, good. Thanks, Daniel. Now let's back up, because I'm going to make the assumption that a lot of y'all haven't been here before, and I'm going to also make the assumption that some of y'all have studied Vicksburg to the exclusion of Port Hudson. So let's assume that there's some people out there like that. No shame. A lot of us come at it this way. You get to know the big ones first, the big national military parks, and then you go from there. So for the Union, a lot of people already know the Union commander, Nathaniel Banks. He's got 3 divisions coming from the Red River. He's got one coming up from New Orleans. He's got another one coming up from Baton Rouge. But who's this Confederate commander? And is he a Yankee at some point?
Yeah, he's actually Major General Franklin Gardner. He's from New York, but he actually marries a woman here from Louisiana whose parents own a plantation. And he actually, at the outbreak of the war, I think he's over in California. But when the war breaks out, he actually leaves and comes and joins and fights for the South. They have troops from Arkansas, Alabama, Louisiana. You have Tennessee, Texas, and Mississippi. Up this way, this is the first bit of high ground north of Baton Rouge, and it's very much like the Vicksburg battlefield in that it's situated on a high bluff overlooking a sharp bend on the Mississippi River. Makes it a perfect place to defend the river. And put their big heavy cannons on that bluff. And when they occupy this location, they're here, and there's actually originally under General Ruggles, but then General Franklin Gardner gets sent over here after Shiloh. And so he's here, and there's actually upwards of 26,000 Confederates here at one time. But many are sent off up to Jackson, Mississippi, up to Vicksburg. And by the time that the siege begins here, he's only got about 7,000 troops left.
Okay, so 7 against maybe 30,000.
About 30,000.
So I have a question for you. It's my impression that you're smart. You don't do this in the summer when the troops had to do it, because as far as I know, half of the Union 10,000 casualties are to disease that are here. I mean, it's just terrible to be here in the summer. So in March, you hold a reenactment. Are you able to get glimpses of the fighting and the siege, even though you've been here a while?
Yeah, definitely. It's great to see so many reenactors. We usually have a few hundred reenactors come out, several artillery pieces, and it gives, even though it's like a microcosm of what a major assault would have been here, it's really neat to see that in action, seeing hundreds of guys and hundreds of muskets going off in a volley, and it's just you can just smell and hear that. It's just, you can't get that experience any other way.
No, and when you're watching on a video, you don't feel the boom of the cannon or something. One of the things I also like that you guys do is 2 other things. You do firing demonstrations even when there's not a reenactment, and then you also have like little boats on a fake river. What's going on here?
So in our pond that we have, which is located near the museum, we actually have usually a static display of Union ships simulating the ships that were here in Admiral Farragut's fleet. But one time a year, and also during the reenactment, we do a little special program where we have radio-controlled ships that are different ships that kind of go throughout the pond. We talk about each of the different vessels and what they did and their history. And then one time a year, we do a nighttime program where we recreate the nighttime naval attack on Port Hudson, which was on March 14th, 1863. And we also recreate the destruction of the USS Mississippi. 3
things. One, you're with the American Battlefield Trust. We're at Port Hudson 160. I'm here with Daniel Goyer, who runs the Port Hudson State Historic Park site. It even says Louisiana State Parks right there. And we hope you'll share this with your friends, and we hope you enjoy. 2 other things. Isn't it that March naval battle where, I don't know how else to say it, Farragut gets his butt handed to him? I mean, he runs those Vicksburg batteries willy-nilly, but he had a tough time.
Yeah, here he only got 2 ships passed. His flagship, the Hartford, and the gunboat Albatross, which was attached to it. Those are the first 2 vessels that make it past. All the other ships, there were 4 other ones, well 5, including the Mississippi, but 4 other ships plus the Mississippi were heavily damaged. They float back to Baton Rouge for repairs or New Orleans. The U.S. Mississippi actually gets stuck on a mud flat on the opposite bank, and the Confederate artillery just pounded. The Union Navy officers, they set the ship on fire as they depart, and eventually it floats back down towards Baton Rouge, and later in the night explodes. The fire hits the powder magazine.
Wow. You know, the Albatross has always struck me as not so good a name for a boat.
Right.
Or a ship. I have one more question for you, but first let me say that on our next video, we're going to cover the real deal fighting at Fort Desperate and some of the most intense fighting of both fights here. Actually, I have two more things. What do you know? I know this surprises everybody who knows me. So first of all, you guys on your sign, you call it the longest true siege. I mean, I think I know what you're talking about, but tell them, why don't you just say the longest siege in American history?
Well, a lot of people they always ask, well, wasn't Petersburg longer? Well, that wasn't necessarily a true siege. A true siege was that this place was completely surrounded and cut off from reinforcements and resupplies for the duration of that siege. It's like a true siege where they're completely surrounded.
Yeah, and you know, you hear about these stories of Vicksburg. Here, I mean, the Confederate troops were reduced to eating, and I heard they preferred mules and rats to horses and dogs.
Right.
But you know, when you're hungry, you'll eat anything.
Yeah, that was same thing here.
Okay, and then my other question about this, we can't go over there. The rough terrain where the Louisiana Native Guard, that's a black unit, actually had to fight. And this is, you know, we're talking about before Fort Wagner. You know, what's going on with that?
Yeah, so a good 7 weeks before the actions of the 54th Massachusetts at Fort Wagner, you actually have the 1st Louisiana and 3rd Louisiana Native Guard regiments on the same date that all this is going on here at Fort Babcock and other places, Fort Desperate, which is just about maybe not even a mile from this location. They're making their attack here, and that's the first time that black regiments are used as a attacking force, regimental strength attacking force, just like that. So first time in U.S. military history.
And it doesn't go well for them in the end.
No, it doesn't. They don't even get about within 200 yards of their objective before having to fall back and eventually retreating.
But it seems to answer the question: will they fight? I mean, I think
they definitely.
The answer is yes.
They were very brave.
Yeah, I was just not long ago. I was at Olustee, and you know, and you see time and again they do in fact fight
Blakely,
quite a bit.
yeah.
Yes, and Fort Blakely, of course. Yeah. So Daniel, this is super cool. We've set it up. We've shown you part of the battlefield. I think you're going to see a clearer part of the battlefield next when we talk about Fort Desperate. Thank you so much for bringing people out to shoot us today, not with guns, but with the camera. And thank you all for watching and for supporting battlefield preservation and education.